Hi, everybody. We're here on a beautiful day in Los Angeles, June 2nd, 2025, and we're just going to have a casual chat with Trey Lotz and talk about the past, present, and future of Trey and a little bit about Scientology. Um, Trey, tell us about young Trey Lotz and what got him interested in Scientology.
Well, when I was a young boy, like maybe 4 or 5 years old, my grandfather. See, I'm Albert Frank Lotz the third, and that's why they call me Trey, because Trey means the third. And my father is Junior, of course, and my grandfather was Al Lotz Senior. Now he was an inventor and a machinist. He had his business in our basement where we were living, and he had like 30 patents, and he would make these devices he would send all around the world. And when I was like 4 years old, I used to go downstairs into the basement when he was working, and he and I would talk a lot. And I would sit at his bench, and he started like paying me for piecework. I'd put things together for him, and he'd sit next to me, make sure I did it right. And so he was quite an interesting person. Like I say, he was like an inventor, but um, he was very much into the power of positive thinking. And he was an early follower of Norman Vincent Peale, who was the father of positive thinking like in the 20s and 30s. But the other thing that was even more interesting was uh, the whole spiritualist movement started near Buffalo. It's right outside of Buffalo, and by the Fox sisters in the late 1800s. And my grandmother and grandfather got involved in the spiritualism and ended up founding, being one of the founding members of the Spiritualist Church in Buffalo. And so they had all of these, anybody that would come to town, like a famous medium or a famous psychic, they would host them, and they would have events and things like that, which my dad, when he was 4 or 5 years old, he became part of that as well. And they found that my dad had psychic abilities as well. Like he became the protege of a famous medium there that lived in Buffalo, and he would sit in her lap, and they would have a meeting, and he would receive messages for people, um, and he had all these experiences. And I heard about all this as a young kid. I mean, my I would listen to these stories, and my eyes were wide open, and it's kind of like, wow, this is really interesting. And I was always curious about it. It's not that I ever thought that I had any of these abilities myself, or um, they certainly had no reality on it. But I thought, sounds like there's a lot more to life than meets the eye. There's a lot more to find out about. And so, as I grew older, I started, I was reading a lot. I used to read psychoanalysis books and psychology books and other sort of, books about the mind, because I was always very curious about people, what made people tick, what made them work the way they were. And so I was like delving into that area. And when I went to college, I wanted to study psychic research. There was a lot of psychic research that was being done at the time by a guy named Ryan, and it was like there was a lot of interest in it. So I took a psychology class, and our psychology, the college I went to, B.F. Skinner had graduated from that college.
Oh, okay.
And he was the original rat lab guy. So our psychology department, which was funded by Skinner, was all rat lab. So I was actually very disappointed that we didn't get into anything interesting. It was just like, oh, how do you feed a rat and get him to run around and stuff like that. So, uh, but I also took a philosophy class, and the basics of philosophy, the textbook was a guy named Hospers, who was a libertarian. He actually ran for governor of California one year. And I did really well in the class. I got like a 96 or 98 in it. And so I said, this is, see, originally I'd wanted to be a doctor, and I ran into organic chemistry and just I had so many MUs. I said, well, that's not going to work out for me. So I started studying philosophy and religion. Now, I was a philosophy and religion major in college, and the professor, see, it was a small college. There was only like, I don't know, 180 people in my class. So it was like as big as a small high school. And
Was
the
that Hamilton College?
yeah, that was Hamilton College in upstate New York, central New York, where and again, I was from Buffalo, so it wasn't too far away from home. And uh, so Dr. Blackwood, he was a recognized expert in Eastern religions. So although we studied comparative religion, studied a lot of religions. Um, Mostly the emphasis was on Buddhism and Hinduism and the history of Eastern religions. And so I got very interested in that. And I said, well, this all sounds pretty interesting. Again, like I know personal reality. You read about reincarnation, things like that. I said, well, I don't know, maybe not. I didn't know. I didn't have any reality on it. But I thought, maybe there's something to it. I like something in the back of my mind said, this is worth pursuing. Now, as a parallel to all of this, I was a professional musician. So I'd started playing professionally in high school with my brother. He was the lead singer. I was the lead guitar player. Our buddy from school was a drummer. And, we picked up different bass players along the way. And we had quite a good band. And so when I went away to college, um, then the following year, my brother followed me there, and then our other friend followed me there. We picked up a bass player, and we started playing around Utica all through college. That's how I made all my spending money, uh, and I noticed that as a guitar player, some days I was very creative, and other days I was not creative. And then in the last year that we played, somebody got us smoking grass, and I noticed, well, when I was like, when I could smoke a joint, and then I felt like I was like Mr. Creative. And then, but after it wore off, I was like, all thumbs. I couldn't. So I said, well, that's very interesting. How could that be like that? And after I graduated from college, this guy that we knew had gone down in New York and done some courses in Scientology, and he really was enthusiastic about it. Came back, told us about it. He had brought a book for me, which I read. I liked the book a lot. I thought it was very good. It was The Evolution of a Science, and Hubbard talks about our methodology is heuristic, which means we go for what works, because one of the subjects I was interested in philosophy was pragmatism, was a philosophy school of philosophy. Like, what are the practical effects of this theory?
Mhm.
And the other thing that I thought was very interesting, I did my senior paper on, was Henry Bergson, who was a French philosopher, and he wrote in the context of a lot of materialistic philosophy that was current at the time, but he wrote a book debunking that. He was the person that coined the phrase the elan vital, the force of life or the energy of life, and he was saying that that's primary, not the physical universe. And it sort of became clear to me, studying religion, studying philosophy, that there was two types of philosophy. There's only two schools of philosophy that exist. One school is that spirit is the source of physical, and the other school is that the physical is the source of spirit. In other words, people people created the spiritual realities, which, of course, in that school are imaginary, and the other school is something spiritual created the physical world. And so it's either religion or materialism. That's the dichotomy of philosophy. And so in studying Bergson and studying Eastern religions and being a musician, I really, I really, once I read this Scientology book, I said, no, I need to know more about it. So I went back to Buffalo where there was a Scientology mission, and I bought all 6 basic books, took them back to my house trailer that I had in Utica, and I said I laid my bed for a week and just read all the books from cover to cover, and and a lot of it was very real to me. The Dianetics book and engrams, and because I could experience that. And it also answered the question of how could you be more creative sometimes than others, because there's a certain mental inhibitions that would key in, um, and so they're keyed in, keyed out. Then you were more or less creative. That was a governing factor, and so that was a real good button for me because I didn't really want to use drugs to be creative because I knew in the long run it would make you less creative and it just created a problem down the line. And we'd been smoking grass for 8 months, maybe off and on a little bit. So it wasn't really extensive, but it was enough to give me a reality that it wasn't going to take me anywhere consistently. It was just going to be a temporary key out. So anyway, around that time, the band broke up. I went back to Buffalo and involved in the mission there, and then I was thinking, oh, I'd like to figure out how this tech works. So I put some money together and went to New York and did my academy levels there, and came back. And I was going to work in Buffalo at the mission, but right when I came back, they'd put in this policy of, well, you have to have a 2.5 year contract. And I said, well, I didn't want to do that because I wanted to get back into music and become a real professional musician. I wanted to start a publishing company, actually. Um, that was my idea.
Music publishing.
Oh yeah, music publishing. Because at that time, a lot of bands were writing their own materials, and they would write the materials, but they didn't have any publishers, and the publishers would rip them off. And so I thought, well, it was a good way of uh, having a good stable business. Just have a bunch of uh,
Mhm.
just published people, give them a good deal, and it would probably work out really well.
Yeah. What was the name of your group?
The Roosters.
Roosters.
And we made some records, and we had a couple local hits. I mean, we were local celebrities within about a 40-mile radius. Outside of that, but we used to play all around upstate New York and even into Massachusetts, Vermont. We went to college, a lot of college weekends, Colgate and um, uh, Syracuse and RPI, St. Lawrence. We played at all. The Smith College we went to one time, which was interesting. And so anyway, we were back in Buffalo. I wasn't playing, and I'd gotten married by that time. And so there was a notice on a bulletin board saying, auditors wanted in Hawaii, guaranteed $25 a week income. I said, well, that sounds pretty good. So, so I went because I wanted to get some practice auditing. And at that time, there was no internships. So, you did your academy levels, but that didn't mean you were a good auditor at all or experienced. You just had some basics. So I went to Hawaii and I started auditing full time there. Well, eventually the org was not making enough money to pay me the $25 a week. In fact, they were having a hard time keeping the lights on. Sometimes the lights, all the power would go off, and they go, "Oh, well, we need to reg somebody and get get money." So anyway, I worked there full time for about 3 months, and
So had you decided to make auditing a lifelong career at that point, or was it okay?
no,
Well, it's a job opportunity, and I'll do it.
yeah, no, I still wanted to. I mean, I wanted to develop that skill, but I was really interested still in my purpose was being a musician.
Mhm.
And also, I just side idea, I'm getting into a business connected with music, which is the publishing.
Mhm.
So, anyways, and then I went back to L.A. after about 3 months. You see, they'd broken the agreement. They didn't have enough money, so they started paying me $5 a week. So I was sleeping in qual in a mattress. I'd roll it up at night and sleep and get up in the morning so people could do their crams. Anyway, so I came back to Los Angeles. I did the standard Dianetics course, and at that time too, you could get a deal. You could get power and the briefing course for like $1,800, and I was a uh, grade 4 quad release. So my next action was power. So I said, I'll do that. So I'll do the briefing course. So I did the briefing course full time for like 3, 4 months. Got through it pretty quickly because at that time there was a lot. If you look at the tech vols up to 69, there was not that. Half the tech vols are before 69 when I did it.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and of course, a lot of the earlier material wasn't being used anymore. So I could go through everything. I said, oh, and this is still applicable. This isn't, so I don't need to get into all of these weeds, and the details of processes that are, you know, sort of orphan processes and nobody's running them anymore. And around that time, I was also wanted to get better as an auditor. So I volunteer audited at the AO and at Celebrity Center. Um, and eventually somebody asked me if I wanted to audit their girlfriend, really begged me to audit their girlfriend because they were having such a hard time with her. And I did. I had one PC and then somebody else who was working at Delta Meter wanted some auditing, so we worked out the same thing, and that's kind of how it started. And once I got going, it see, my whole music idea was half of it, the band part, getting the band together, was based on my brother. Now, my brother at the time had joined staff, and he didn't really want to be a professional musician anymore, and I wasn't going to be able to do it myself. So, and then at the same time, I started really liking more and more the whole subject of auditing and auditing people. And I could see, well, this you could be an independent auditor, you could have a practice, and at least pay your bills and do an activity that's very gratifying to the people that you're working with. You're creating a lot of positive effects in the environment and with the people you're working with, and it's also very satisfying work. And dealing with people, dealing with the mind. I mean, that's really when you get training, you're really learning how to deal with you know the different dynamics, the second, third, fourth dynamic, particularly. So, people that are trained auditors usually do better in life. Um, there's auditing and training are the two sides of the bridge, and 50-50 gains on each side. So I thought, well, I'll do both, So then eventually I did the Class A course and my practice was thriving. And actually, I've been doing it ever since, 56 years now.
Wow. How many hours under the bridge?
Well,
Or over the bridge or on the bridge?
yeah, yeah, I've done about 65,000 hours
Wow.
total. I was doing like 1,400 hours a year
Mhm.
on average, So
That's amazing.
yeah, and still love it. It's never boring. It's always interesting. I'm always learning new things. Scientology really appealed to me in one respect because it's not something you ever run out of. You never say, "Oh, I have this mastered. Now I can go do something else." No, you never really master everything. That's you never reach the limit of your potential in that subject. You can always expand. You can always get more competent, more able. Have a better life, better influence in the area around you, and make that a better area.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's how I got. That was my time track on how I became a professional auditor. When I started field auditing, there was no other field auditors. That was like I was the first one to start. an independent practice in LA. I mean, other people had done it in other cities, but there was nobody in LA. And within 3, 4 years, there was like 30, 35 field auditors. Yeah. So, I mean, it became a sort of a popular thing, but eventually it led to problems with the orgs because the orgs always thought that the field auditors were stealing their PCs and there was this tension, and eventually that kind of, sunk the whole idea of being a field auditor. Today there's very few,
I was going to say that the number has dwindled since it's
a lot. There may be two in LA now. Yeah, but I'm not even sure that they're still there.
gosh. Hey, you mentioned training to class 8, and yesterday we were talking about something you realized when you were on the class 8 course that was presented to you a lot, and that was the concept of standard tech. And you said some pretty interesting things about what standard tech is, and I was wondering if you could tell us, because IndyBridge, we're about standard bridge, standard LRH tech. What does standard mean to you?
Yeah, that's a good question because that's a widely misunderstood idea. Um, the Class 8 course was so good because after you'd studied all the complexity of the tech on the briefing course, LRH in the 18 lectures on the Class 8 course really emphasizes the basics of the tech. And he also the higher you go on your training level, the more LRH trusts the auditor to correctly manage a session based on the present time perception of the session. When I was in 1975, I was on the Apollo doing my internships. I did a Dynex and Class 6 internship on the ship, and the uh, the supervisor of the internship was a guy named Brian Livingston, really good guy. He was one of LRH's 3 experimental auditors that had been with him for years, all through the 60s and 70s. And so I was on the internship, and every morning he'd go over the folders with us. And there was one morning I had a PC that I had done a session on that I'd sort of improvised something in session based on what was going on with the PC. And so he sat me down and opened the folder up and said, "Yeah, I know I screwed up on that. I did something that it seemed like a good idea at the time, but I don't know any reference on it, And he looked at me and says, "Oh no," he said, "you know," he says, "you did the right thing, actually." He says, when with a new auditor, if they do what they think is right, they're going to screw it up every time. He says, but once you're an experienced auditor, the way what you think is going to be a good thing to do in the session is usually the right thing. And he went on to explain, he didn't really put it in these words, but he was explaining the difference between rote and standard. A standard approach to tech means that you're not violating the basics. So you're staying within the broad stream of basic auditing, the auditor's code, the TRs, model session. There's a few simple basics. Maintaining the interest of the PC and the willingness of the PC to talk to the auditor, the sessionability of the PC, and so on and so on. And in the Class 8 course, he mentions auditing by definition. He says nothing wrong with auditing by definition, which means you have the definition of a problem. Well, you ask somebody if they have a problem, they give you something, they give you a condition or a situation. It means you can pull the string until you get an answer that fits the definition of a problem. And that and also an LRA says, a good experienced auditor can invent processes. And but you wouldn't trust in class 4 to invent processes, but experienced class 8 could do that. So, that became a very important uh, stable datum for me. That it allowed me to stay in PT in a session and audit the person in front of me in a way that kept them on track, but wasn't rote. Rote means that you want to follow um, uh, a script, you could say. Um, and there's a big difference between being rote and being standard. Being rote really ends up being mechanical. Have you ever been audited by a auditor who was mechanical? You know what I'm talking about. You know the difference there. And the auditors that I liked the best that audited me were the ones that were, um, I don't know, they were just in calm and they were responding appropriately to the whole situation. So you felt like you were being duplicated, you were being understood. People listened to what you had to say, and they didn't just, brush you off.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was, the Class A course was just really put everything into perspective for me. And then, of course, over the years, you just get better and better at it based on your experience.
Hmm. So
Yeah.
experience counts for a lot too, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It takes you about 2,000 hours to get good at auditing. And there've been a lot of studies that say that in any field, whether it's, polishing diamonds or playing music or playing golf, when you've done about 10,000 hours of practice and application, then you become an expert at that area.
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
heard that too, right?
And so, that's why it takes, 5, 6, 7 years for auditors to be really completely on top of it and be able to trust themselves in a session to do a good session. And, you consistently get very good results.
It's great.
Yeah.
You're able to handle whatever comes up and pivot, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. And, and you learn too with the auditor's code, like another key stable datum. And I just say because a lot of people misunderstand this. LRH says in there, you can, uh, you can never give the PC too many R factors. And so, and then he also in another point says, I always answer the PC's questions. So I said, no, there must be a difference between R factors and answers to questions. And then it gave me another important insight, I think, into auditing is that if you've ever been in a session and you ask a question, they say, well, I can't give you a future R factor. You're like, what are we gonna, what's our next major action here after what we're going to be doing? And he said, well, I can't tell you that. Well, they're not answering the question.
Right.
They're giving an R factor. Now, the rule is you don't give the PC a future R factor. You don't sit them down and say, now I want you to know that your program is X, Y, and Z.
Right.
You know, but that's not answering their question. That's the auditor giving an R factor out of the auditor's origination, not answering an origination of the PC. So that allows the PC to track with the session, not only in PT and session, but to have a broader overview of the general path that they're on and, the bridge, basically, how they're going to, handle on the bridge what they are interested in handling, and also continue to make progress towards overall OT.
Okay. So they know maybe what's coming up next.
Yeah, well,
Maybe
it,
it's hard
it,
to postulate that
it,
almost.
it doesn't, it doesn't get them to start thinking about it. They already were thinking about it, and you're answering their questions, so you're ending the cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it actually takes their attention off it.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's good. All right. Well, so you've audited, thousands of hours and in the field, and you've always been independent, right? You never, except for the start, you were never really like a staff.
Yeah, I mean, I volunteered at the orgs, and at that time, it was much looser. They would, like I did all of the int rundowns for Celebrity Center because when the int rundown came out, uh, nobody was hatted in it except me. And none of their org auditors were hatted in it. So they said, "Hey, we'll give you $10 for every in rundown you do on RPCs. And I also worked for the Sea Org in that they had a lot of people joining the Sea Org, and they had to do a 16 question sec check, and none of their auditors could do it. So,
Oh,
so, so they were actually hiring me as a field auditor to do some of the actions for them, and I also volunteered. Um, and that was a lot of fun. And the internships too, of course, you're auditing in the org, and you really get a view of behind the scenes, what's happening behind the curtain of the org. There's the public face of the org, and then there's what's really going on behind the scenes. And it gave me a good insight into what it was like being in the Sea Org, or what it was like just being on staff. I audited in the in LA org and audited staff there. And on one hand, it wasn't a life that I was interested in having. It was too regimented for me. I wasn't going to be happy with that. But on the other hand, I could totally see the dedication that was necessary to have that kind of self-discipline. And I really came to the conclusion that um, although a lot of the staff members were basically very good people with well-intentioned people, but they weren't getting any good training other than their hat training, which means they lacked a basic understanding of the breadth and scope of Scientology as a philosophy. And I was horrified to get their folders and find out they were getting one session every 6 months or every 4 months, and it was just a review session or a cram rudiment, or there very few of them were actually getting any kind of regular case gain. So you got people whose their only case gain was no case on post, which is fine as far as it goes. And people can get a certain they can make a certain amount of progress just by having that, because you're drilling your self-discipline and controlling your mind, but it doesn't really handle your case. So you get people, then eventually they'll kind of crack, or they'll blow up, or they'll dramatize, and no case on post is kind of goes out the window.
yeah.
We've all experienced that.
Yep. Every, every person on earth does that at some point. I've had it. That's it.
Plus, some staff members get into the whole GPM of the things. A GPM means, well, a GPM has to do with when you're opposing something. Well, you're opposing it with emotion. And we used to talk about ethics officers. Sometimes, there were some really good ones, and there were some ones that everybody avoided like the plague, because, you know, when you sat down, they weren't trying to help you. They were trying to wipe you out.
Get you back into line.
Yeah. We used to always say, well, never give the post of ethics officer to somebody who really wants it.
I could see that.
Yeah.
Well, 1982 was a pivotal year for the Church of Scientology. What were your thoughts at the time about what was going on and the splintering that was happening?
Well, I had mixed feelings about it because, starting in the late 70s, the prices started to go up. And that probably for me, the high water mark of everything was the mid 70s. And to, 76, 77. I mean, the orgs were thriving. Celebrity Center had like 1,000 people a week coming in every week doing courses. My practice was booming. Auditing was affordable. Um, then the prices went up, and they went up, and they went up, and they went up. And rather than whatever it was, $600, $800 an intensive, it was like $4,000 an intensive.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, you're lucky if you saw one intensive in a year, and so you had to. So people weren't going up the bridge. Some people went into training so they could co-audit. Other people just started working on admin stuff in their own life. Admin. And I did a ton of admin scales and ethics conditions, help person become more prosperous so that they could afford the bridge. And but the bridge itself was really kind of dying on the vine. And so that was, and it was particularly the missions were really getting strangled by this. And that's when the whole mission revolt started. And so I had mixed feelings about it. I thought, well, there's definitely something needs to change, because this is untenable. This is never going to work in the long run. But on the other hand, um, I had some loyalty to the church as well, because I mean I'd been in the church for, I mean, at that point it was like 12, 13 years. Um, a lot of the problems and stresses of the orgs I wasn't experiencing because I was really outside the orbit of the actual
That makes sense.
orgs, and so anyway, I thought, and there wasn't any talk really about splinter groups or anything at that time. Um, that was a little bit later, not a lot later, within 6 to 8 months. Then
83, yeah.
yeah, Mayo started his Advanced Ability Center, and I, I like the idea. I really considered just resigning and going with Mayo, but I thought, no, it's like what a lot of people think. All my friends are in Scientology. If I disconnect, I get declared. Then and other members of my family were in, and plus, I was doing very well as a field auditor. I was I had enough flexibility in what I was doing, so I mean, I never had a slow week, you know, for, I mean, my entire auditing career. I mean, always somebody canceled or dropped off lines, and then somebody else would show up. It was just pretty remarkable. Um, so I didn't really want to throw all that away, and I thought things could get resolved. I thought, well, maybe LRH, he's off the line. Maybe he'll come back on the line and straighten things out, because he always had. In the '70s, things would start to go a little sideways, or somebody'd get, start running some aberrated game on the field or on the orgs, and that would last for a few months, and then LRH would get wind of it, and he'd get things straightened out. But then nobody showed up. But see, all of our think was, this is a problem of middle management. This is not the problem of senior management. They just are unaware of it, or you know and that attitude persisted for quite a while. Eventually people realized, no, since LRH died and Miscavige took over. See, at first it wasn't really much of a change. The RTC was starting to get their nose in the tech, which wasn't good. But uh, like I say, mostly I was out of that. There was all this org politics. I had no interest in org politics. There was a big flap over here. Well, it really had nothing to do with me, or some ED got taken off post, or you'd have these Div 6 guys in the org, and you'd introduce yourself, and by the time they walked out the door, there was a new Div 6. It's like we were there constantly. There was constantly changing. Um, so that's what I felt at the time. So I mean, I got kicked out of the church in '82, not because of anything I did, but they were kicking out a lot of field auditors. So I protested it. I got a board of review, and it got canceled, and I was fine with it. It was fine for quite a long time. Where it really started to get bad was after OT8 came out, and Miscavige's expectation was, after OT8, everything would just boom like crazy, because the OTAs would disseminate, and they would, well, a lot of the people that did OT8 were professional people, doctors, chiropractors, dentists, older business owners, mostly people in their 50s and 60s. Well, these are not people who are going to give up everything and join staff. That just never happened. And They say, well, then you have to do, but the same thing, you couldn't do the briefing course, um, and still run a business. And
Yeah.
so, uh, so Miscavige started to think, well, the problem is ethics. Everybody's ethics are out. And so that became the big pressure point. Now, LRH talks about another interesting thing on the Class 8 course. He talks about ethics, tech, and admin. He says the sequence is ethics goes out, tech goes out, and admin goes out. That's the sequence. If you find admin's out, it means tech is out and ethics are out. However, he says, right prior to ethics going out, there's out tech. See, so it really is circular.
Interesting.
He said whenever there's a person on the ship, this is on the ship, gets into ethics trouble, he says, I always call for their folder and what was their last session and what was the mistake in it. And I fix that. And he says a lot of times that handles the whole thing, or at least, there's a very minor adjustment that needs to be made, and the guy's back to battery. It isn't a long, arduous, nonsense cycle of now you have to blah blah blah, and your runway is now 6 miles longer than it ever was.
Yeah.
So again, it just shifted everybody off the bridge onto all kinds of other nonsense, and that was just spinning their wheels. So, I mean, I always saw that this was the biggest problem was just taking the attention off the bridge. And LRH always, the stable names go up the bridge, get some training. Period. Money was not the priority. That shifted. Money became the priority. Well, we're gonna have to increase. We're gonna have to improve our PR by having beautiful buildings for people to come to. So the pressure became enormous on finances, and making financial, um, uh, just contributions, uh, not for auditing. People would always be regged. Buy your next intensive, buy a bunch of auditing, but it was for auditing. And then it became just give us a bunch of money for nothing except for a little plaque on the wall. And it's like, that's, again, it was like really off track. Everything got so off track. Uh, so eventually when I got booted out again in 2007, you know, I kind of, I thought, geez, things are not getting better. It was just getting worse and worse under Miscavige. Became untenable to be a field auditor. You were supposed to, right after I left, he put in a new thing where every field auditor every day had to go into ASHO at night with their folders and get them CS'd. Now, I mean, you can imagine you had 4 or 5 folders maybe. You went at 11:30 at night, you'd get home at 4 in the morning after getting your folders CS'd, unless you had a cram, which you always did. And, so, and then you had to do that. And then, I mean, it was just like, who could do it? And you'd have to get up the next day and audit. You couldn't do it. Plus, when I helped first started, I would get a phone call every 6 months to renew my membership. And that was it. There was no interference for my help. They were helpful, nice people. You could go in to talk with them and go over things if you wanted to, but nobody was bothering you. After starting after in the late 90s and early 2000s, oh man, you were getting 2, 3 calls every day. Reg this guy, get some donations here, get his membership, get this guy back on lines. And trying to pull people off your lines, and eventually that's what kind of blew up and why I ended up getting booted out. But uh, it was like basically they were just well, they just wanted to, they had this thing called the external influence on the orgs. They said, well, the orgs aren't doing well, so it must be the field auditors. Well, that's just scapegoating,
Yeah.
because the orgs weren't doing well because they weren't handling people well, and the field auditors were doing well because it was a personal communication line, it was a comfortable situation. You didn't. I never did much regging really. Um, People who showed up, they wanted to buy auditing. That. that's about the limit of the regging that I would ever do. But boy, anybody that's just they buy a book and all of a sudden there's like, oh, it's like buy your whole bridge, and then relentless pressure to do that. So so anyway, I realized that, and this loyalty thing too. I said, what should I do? Should I, quote, try to handle this? Well, I quickly found out that nobody was handling this. That there was like 10,000 people that had gotten declared, and including a lot of field auditors, a lot of people I knew, and someone tried to handle it, and then it never went anywhere. A couple people did get their declares lifted, but then they were said, okay, now you have to do all your training from the bottom up. You have to do the briefing course and all your courses before you're allowed to even get any auditing. And even some people that did that, they still wouldn't let them get any auditing because they said, well, they'll never trust you again to let you do your OT levels or do more OT levels or whatever. But that was the truth. So I realized that was going to go nowhere. And my loyalty really was not to the church per se, because the church had changed so much. It wasn't the same thing that I originally had loyalty to. It was a completely different animal, and I had no loyalty to that way of operating. I thought it was wrong, and not only wrong, but very destructive. And it was like created such hugely bad PR for Scientology. It just became unworkable, the whole thing. So I decided I was just gonna, forge ahead and start auditing again. So that's what I did, and it's worked out so much better. You know, it allows you to, I really appreciate the freedom. Somebody asked the question about, well, what's the answer to the future of Scientology?
Mhm.
Well, what I learned over the years is there were every org at different times would have a golden age. And some people it was in the 70s, other people it was in the early 80s. The common denominator was a good leader, an OT, high ARC person in the top position. Because the leader, the commanding officer of an org or the head of a mission, their personality ended up permeating the whole org. So if they were uptone and good common sense, good tech application with in a sensible way, that's how people started to operate under them. Um, so the problem is that this Church of Scientology now has the personality of David Miscavige because he's dominated the whole scene so entirely that if you don't have his personality, you're an enemy. And you don't last long,
Yeah.
or you wished you wouldn't last long,
Yeah.
one or the other. So I think that, okay, fast forward 20 or 30 years, well, Miscavige is not going to be here anymore. Who's going to replace him? Well, it could be either somebody good or somebody bad. If it's somebody bad, they'll continue to suck wind and barely get by. If it's somebody good, since the infrastructure is still there, and they do have a lot of beautiful buildings, if they started treating people well and actually following basic policy, first policy, maintain friendly relations with the environment. If they did that, it could boom again, because anytime you apply Scientology, when you really apply Scientology with the right agenda, which is just to help people have better lives and be happier in their life, and the exchange that you get is like lower on the agenda. It's not the top of the agenda, which is backwards. You produce, you outflow, you create good effects in the environment, and you're going to end up surviving well as well. It just works that way. If you make money the priority, you end up not surviving as well because you have the whole cycle backwards. And you just see that over and over again. The same with business people. It works in business too. The minute they start to, the minute they cut corners on the service and on the products and just make money the priority, the business goes downhill.
Or even, as we were discussing with a business owner yesterday, you have to treat your employees as if they are valuable because they are. They make your company or break it.
Right, exactly.
Because you could treat an employee like an object, like a well, as my husband would say, a rented mule, or you can treat them like valuable beings.
That's funny.
He says, "Oh, I've been working like a rented mule." Yeah, okay, yeah.
Well, even the church got into this thing of command intention and, reverse management. They said anybody that made a suggestion was trying to reverse manage.
Ooh,
So you were limited. You were immediately targeted. If you even made a suggestion how something could be improved, that meant you were counter-intention, and you were a target of retribution. I mean, really. And there was an old policy called model hat of an executive, which somehow that policy disappeared out of the later volumes. But it says very clearly in there, he says, the person that's closest to the scene always knows more about the scene than you do as a manager. So you should listen to the person actually managing the situation, who's right on, who's the hands-on person. You listen to that person and get data from him. Uh, and so that becomes an importance of the inflow of actual correct data by management, and not just a one-way command flow based on fixed ideas of the manager.
right. So it's not just
Yeah,
top down directives, but uh, suggestions. It's a
it's got to be a
flowing
two-way flow.
power. Yeah, it's like flowing power. Hey, I can see a better way to do this. Might make things more efficient, less costly.
Well, the basic on that is it's a simple basic. A one-way flow always slows down, stops, and then reverses. That's just a law of the physical universe. So if
It's cool.
you have to have an exchange or else the flow stop.
Just like communication.
Yeah, so you look at the church, the flows have stopped.
Wow. When you boil it down like that, it looks so simple. It's like,
Yeah.
but
Well,
that,
and I wanted to make a comment. It's a somewhat different subject, but
sure.
somebody asked the question of what are the valuable uh, basics of Scientology. Well, I already talked about that a little bit in terms of handling the environment. The auditor's code, TRs, granting of beingness, those things, very important. Granting of beingness is very important. What that means is it doesn't mean everything's everything's okay. Well, it sort of means in one sense, it means a person is okay the way they are. A person, because the minute you have the intention to change a person, because there's something about them that you don't like, it immediately triggers in them the counter intention to I'm going to stay the way I am and go to hell.
Mhm.
And so people don't change when around people that don't like them. They can be forced to change, in which case it's an overwhelm and it's just a valence shift. But to actually modify your own reality, you need to be in communication with somebody with a different reality who actually has affinity for you and actually has reality on what you're saying, and maybe is suggesting other datums or other facts that cause you to say, maybe I could change my viewpoint, or maybe I could, change how I operate. And so that's really that's why a granting of beingness is so important, because people will change when you grant them beingness. Because they're in calm, their realities shift because you have affinity and you're in calm. So their understandings change. Um, if you're going around with a bunch of fixed ideas about, you know, just looking at people like you're looking at the flaws in people, or their their shortcomings, and and fixing on that with some hostility. It's a lack of affinity. You don't have any real reality on why they are like the way they are. So the communication is going to have a lot of force in it. It gets rejected so easily. This doesn't work. But anyway, those are some of the basics. But what I was getting to is the management, because people say, well, how could you have somebody who's done OT3 or OT5 or even OT8, and you look at their lives and they're not doing that great. They're doing okay, maybe, or maybe they're not doing well at all. Why is that? Well, there's two main reasons for that. One is a lot of people never wanted to get training for various reasons. They didn't think they could do it. They didn't have time to do it. Too many MUs. And so their management skills are not that great. So the degree of success the bridge gives you high awareness and high ARC. Training gives you the ability to manage the environment. And a thetan is an eighth dynamic, basically, that has seven other dynamics. All of those dynamics are something that the eighth dynamic source is creating. So all your dynamics are a creation. Now, the basic on creation is when you create something, you want to maintain its existence. So you care about and maintain the things that you've wanted to create and that are there that you've created. Like you create a family, you want to take care of your family. You want your family to do well because it's your creation. And if it's not your creation, you'll try to unmock it. Or if you go out of valence, then it's not the creation of the valence you're in, and that valence will try to unmock it. See, that's why it's, if you're operating from your own viewpoint, you're going to be naturally operating in alignment with your dynamics because you want those dynamics to survive. Now, the condition of your dynamics is a direct reflection of your management ability. You can, manage your household, manage your career, manage your body. It requires a good work ethic, requires self-discipline, continuous hatting, never thinking you know it all and you don't need to learn anymore. And also, what I think is important is that you can't neglect keeping your own case in good shape. Because even if you finished a level, a year or two later, the environment tends to start to impinge on you. You start to feel a little crumbly at the edges, and then if more time goes by, as this gets more of an inroad into your space, I always do. I regularly in mornings, if anytime I feel like it, I just get in session and I do a session, find out what's going on, handle it, and it keeps my space clean and it's something everybody should do. In the church, you can't, it's considered out tech to, if you're not on an OT level, to audit yourself. That's not true at all. Why not? You know how to do it. In fact, you should keep in practice on how to do it.
You're talking solo
Yeah,
auditing.
solo auditing, just being able to have it there. You pick up the cans. Okay. There's an ARC break, and you handle it, or there's some mass, there's some charge, or there's some connection that's not correct. You handle it, and then it gives you a new lease on life. It's like a renewal, a revival. So you want to just keep that going, and it keeps you on an even keel. If you're keyed out and winning in life, that's the ideal scene. And that requires good case condition and good management skills. So studying the admin tech, even if you don't own a business, and it's sort of beside the point. You're still managing your family, you're still managing your environment, your household where you live, and so on and so on. So I don't know that it's almost like it's hard to spot anything in the tech that isn't useful, and people find different things to be the most important things for them. one of the things I get out of auditing is people come in who are familiar with the tech, and they been trained Scientologists, and they tell me their wins and what the stable datums were that they're operating on. And I go, oh yeah, I hadn't thought of that in a while. That's important. That's a good stable datum. And so, I'm constantly refreshing and renewing my understanding of the tech, and also seeing how what areas of the tech are so broadly applicable, or that people get wins applying. And in that way, when people ask me these kind of questions, I go, yeah, oh well, it's this, and then they go, yeah, that's true. I'll have to get back to doing that. And like Ellerite says, you're not really giving anybody something new. You're just reminding them of things they kind of know already. And so when something indicates, it means, oh yeah, I knew that. I knew it, but I wasn't applying it, or I didn't know it.
You put it in the back of the closet and forget about it.
Yeah, yeah. It's like,
Yeah, useful, but forgotten about it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Well, let's see here. We've got a couple questions, specific questions, about the L's. You want to talk about the L's a little bit?
Oh yeah. Well, Els is the Mount Matterhorn of
Mhm.
Scientology procedures. It's probably the rundown, the L11, 10, 11, and 12. They're done in the sequence of 11, 12, 10. The sequence of development was 10, 11, and 12, but 11 and 12 were developed to undercut L10 because L10 was taking a long time, like a really long time to get through. So if you undercut it with L11 and 12, those are shorter rundowns, and then it really cuts down on the time that it takes to do L10. But let's say, like I've done all three L's. My wife Nikki has done all three L's, and I've done a lot of L's auditing since I was trained on how to do the L's in 2008. I've probably done 10, 12 1,000 hours of L's auditing. So it's such a it's so much fun for me to audit because you're creating it in present time. It gives you a bunch of principles and a certain format, but filling in the details is really exists in present time in the session. Uh, uh, the guy that trained me how to do the L's, he says, the L's is basically simple. He says it's just two parts to it: finding something to audit, finding an item to audit, and then auditing the item. Now, how you find the item, there's a lot of different ways of doing that. How you audit the item, there's a lot of different ways of doing that. So the skill of the L's auditor is knowing how to find the items, and which tool to use to handle the items, and how that runs.
That actually comes back to standard.
Yeah, it comes back to, and the more you can't be an L's auditor and be rote.
Yeah.
You couldn't do it. You can run a repetitive process and be kind of rote. Look around here and find something you could have. You could run that. It's hard to go wrong with that. But
Yeah.
when you're doing listing and nulling and finding items, but anyway, the biggest amount of gain for the shortest amount of time is in the L's auditing. In the L's auditing, you're handling your GPM case. Like when on your OT levels, you're handling your implant GPM's case. Between let's say OT2 and OT7, you're handling your implant GPM case. Now, once you've cleared the deck of your implant GPM's case, because see, that confuses ownership. You've got GPMs and you've got implant GPMs. The GPMs that you have are the same pattern as of the implant GPMs, but the implant GPMs, shoot you off in a wrong direction. The purpose of those implants are to tie you up so you're weak and you're confused, and you can't ever be a problem to whoever tried to implant you. That's what the whole purpose of it is. Your own GPMs were just games you played for millions of years, and went through a certain pattern of back and forth on it, and eventually you abandoned the game, and that became a little point in the GPM, and then there's an opposing point in the GPM. So there's a terminal, which is which is your side of it, the opposing uh, uh, terminal, which is your enemy. So there's a, so that's what a GPM is. The basic of the reactive mind is dichotomies. Um, One of the things that impressed me in the very beginning, reading the tech, as LRA says, we go on infinity-based logic and not dichotomy thinking. Dichotomy thinking is reactive mind thinking. Good, bad, right, wrong, up, down, important, unimportant, or, uh, most of the effective, in fact, really almost all of the processes are based on discharging the GPM bank. They're based on discharging dichotomies in the bank that gives you, in Buddhism, they talk about the golden mean, the middle path. The middle path is an exterior point from two opposing points that allows you to see something on one side and something on the other side. Maybe you can see some right and wrong on both sides, and it allows you to make an adjustment and stay, kind of down the middle.
Mhm.
You can see this in almost everything, in politics and personal relationships, um, just the way that people think about things. If they think about things in terms of all good and all bad, you know, there's no rightness in either one of those viewpoints. you know, Rightness isn't just rightness of think, it's rightness of product. And you can't get products when you're basically out of communication and opposing the environment. So you've got dichotomies um, that are audited in the L's. There's a little line. In order to get trained on the L's, you have to listen to these uh, 32 GPM tapes, and the L's are derived from all of this GPM research that was done in the 60s. At one point in one of the tapes, he says, well, he says, there's a lot of GPMs. He says, Satan's have what, 23,000 of them, because they've been around forever. And these GPMs, even if they're a million years each of them, um, it's still a lot of millions, you know. So it's like the Ngram Bank. You're never able to audit every Ngram you've ever experienced. That would take you forever to do. You audit them enough so that you rise above it and no longer need those mechanisms, or no longer have that mechanisms of making Ngrams. Oh, that's clear. OT is when you no longer have need or the need or activity of creating GPM thinking. That's between clear and OT. It's the same thing, but it's on a much broader, bigger level. Somebody who's clear still has the entanglements of past games and areas that they're still creating. It's not an engram. It's like a million engrams all collapsed into a mass.
Mhm.
So anyway, the L's discharge the GPM bank. Elroy says if you just keep discharging dichotomies, eventually you discharge the bank. The GPM bank, not the R6 bank. The R6 bank you handle on your lower levels, and then on up to OT3 and so on. The GPM bank you handle on you're always taking charge off the GPM bank, but actually erasing it, you know, the L's do that, and that was supposedly going to be OT9 through 15, and the L's processes are derived from the 60s research and the OT9 through 15 um, OT levels, as LRH had conceptualized them in outline form back in the late 60s. So anyway, it's not a short action. I would say do all three L's if you're not I mean, L11 usually gets run in less than an intensive. That's pretty short. L12, maybe 35 hours, 50 at the most, 25 at the least. L10, the fastest I've ever done it is 55 hours. Um, I took 110 hours. Other people have taken more, 80, 90, 150, 140. If you're going to do a good, thorough job, I mean, you can totally blow out and get the EP. You don't have to do all the steps. There's like 38 steps on L10.
Oh,
And some of them are pretty, there's about 2,000 questions. And each question is designed to get an item to run. So you can see where it can.
It'll get a little detailed coverage
Yeah,
of
and
everything.
people have, there's some black PR out there about the L's, like the L's are just like a big sec check. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. Because when you're running, you run a lot of one of the big workhorse processes on the L's is done and withheld. Four flows. What has somebody done to you? What have they withheld from you? What have you done? What have you withheld? Well, the way that people run it is what bad thing have you done? What bad thing have you withheld? Well, that only runs out um, a subcategory of done and withheld. A done is any action. What have you done? What action have you taken that's between you and the environment or you and that person? What have you withheld? What have you not done, failed to do, or wanted to do but didn't, or started to do but didn't finish? Or held back with some energy. Like he isn't asking for an overt or a withhold. He's asking for the action of doing and the action of withholding. What is that? That is inflow and outflow. That is reach and withdraw. That is postulate and perceive. You're running any aberration as an aberration of reach and withdraw. That's a little line in a HCOB one time that I read, and I thought, well, that's such a basic datum. And that's the basic underlying dichotomies because dichotomies inhibit your reach because you don't reach to an enemy, you attack the enemy or you withdraw from the enemy. So all aberrations and aberrations reach and withdraw. So you're balancing out and discharging the can't have, must have, can't reach, must reach, can't be aware, isn't not aware, aware, too aware, less aware, too much attention on it, not enough attention on it. All of those dichotomies get normalized in on the L's. And that brings me to a really key point of what people get out of the L's. And it's very, very surprising. It surprised me. Somebody asked my wife, what did you get out of the L's? And she thought about it. She said, I just feel normal. I feel normal all the time. And that means two things. Number one, I'm used to it. Number two, you don't get battered around by intrusive thoughts or weird thoughts or weird valences or you just can go through life and life isn't re-stimulating to you. Um, you can handle something, not handle something, play a game or not play a game. Oh, another really interesting datum from LRH that actually the PC reminded me of. LRH said one time, he says, when I find myself in a game that I don't like, I either do everything I can to win it or I do everything I can to leave it. So don't let yourself get stuck in an end theta game. You either win it or you get out of it. And you cut. Like they say in investing, they say let your profits run and cut your losses.
Yeah.
If something is an end theta thing, you do everything you can to get it off your lines. Um, even it's good advice as far as conflicts in life. People say, I'm going to sue this guy or I'm going to have a lawsuit.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you've just committed yourself to a crappy game for several years. Uh, you're better off. Maybe not. Somebody sues you for $5,000. It's a nuisance lawsuit or whatever. And I've never been sued, so it's not a. I'm not saying that from personal experience, but I've had PCs that have had lawsuits. So thing is, you could fight it, but then you're in a. This is going to occupy your attention for the next several years. It's going to cost you a lot of money. In the end, you can feel right about the outcome if you win, but it's also what was the cost of that? You end the cycle, pay it off, get back to producing, get back to outflowing.
Right.
Yeah.
Get it off your lines for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, produce and exchange. That's what more basic stable datum is there? All morale is based on production. So if you're not feeling that great, see what area you need to start producing more and, things like that. But so yeah, so Nikki said, yeah, I just feel normal. And and two other PCs completely disrelated say the same thing. And the other thing they said was, and this is also what Nikki said was, and in life, I see something needs to be done and I just do it. And actually, a couple other people said that too, that had finished all their L's.
Mhm.
You know, it's not that they go around, you know, levitating and making, that's not really, that's not really it. I mean, if, by the time you get to be OT, you have pretty good telepathic ability. I don't know anybody can move objects around, and your exterior, what degree are your exterior full perception, some perception, or most of your perceptions coming from the body? There's a gradient scale there, but you're still exterior. And when you're able to walk that middle path that we talked about, then you're exterior to life. You can play the game, but you don't get stuck in the game. You don't have a must have or a can't have.
Okay. Yeah.
So there's other rundowns that I do, like a certainty rundown, which is again based on dichotomies.
Mhm.
That is a certainty of that is like the idea that a concept is good or bad or right or wrong, and running that, disentangles you from thinking dichotomies, fixed ideas. There's another rundown I do called a havingness rundown, which handles the dichotomies of can't have and must have, because the ultimate havingness is have or not have. That's a havingness.
Yeah.
I can have it. I don't have to have it. Whatever it is. And that also takes you out of the GPM, see, because uh, you can have your opponents. You don't have to have your opponents.
Yeah.
See, it doesn't mean something's right or wrong. It's better to not have opponents than having opponents, but you have to have the ability to not have them.
Right. I don't need to fight this battle today.
Right.
Yeah, I don't need to fight that person. That is cool. What a great idea. So the golden mean. Oh, I've got a question here from Ian. He says, can someone explain why doing the L's before a certain level is not advised? Maybe I could rephrase that. When do you do the L's on the bridge?
Well, you can do it anytime after expanded grade 4 or clear,
Mhm.
or any point not in the grade 6 to OT3 interference area. You can do it after OT3, after OT4, after OT5, after OT8, after OT7. Any of those areas you can do the L's in.
Okay.
That was the original data on that. It's been changed by the church, but you know, see the other thing about the L's tech. Uh, the guy that trained me, he was an L's auditor at Flag. He was their top L's auditor, but he was trained in the 90s. And he began to realize that, that starting in the 80s, see, because all of the most upstat public Scientologists, all of the wealthiest Scientologists were getting their L's because at Flag, it cost $200,000, $300,000 to do the L's. I mean, when I do them, it's like 10% of that, at the most. But anyway, so you had to have a lot of money to even think about being on the L's. And so these people became big targets for regging, IAS regging. So the IAS reggers these IAS people that were doing the regging started to think, well, maybe I could, tell the auditor to pull this guy's overts on not giving money to the IAS. And then we can catch him when he's really keyed out, and we can hang him upside down and shake him and see what change falls out of his pocket. Uh, So they started doing what's it called executive CSing. They'd follow the PC's progress and said, notify me when he has a big blowout win, and then they jump on him as soon as he comes out of session. Well, a lot of times that to crash their win. I've audited several people that just got, just went from really exterior and their best win ever to, oh my God, what the hell. And and then they also, they would say, well, pull this guy's withholds. And we know he's got withholds because he's not giving us, he could give us more money and he isn't. Um, and they started changing some of the tech of the L's. There were other technical changes that they made that um, were never part of the original L's that when LRH wrote them and was personally CSing them for the first 4 or 5 years that the L's were delivered. So Pierre, the guy who trained me to do the L's, realized that he needed to go back and find out how the L's were originally run. So he went to some of the original L's auditors that were still around, Otto and a couple other guys that were in their 80s by that time. This was in the early 2000s, and a lot of them had some of this L's HCOBs and materials because I don't know, at that time they weren't so tight on it. So he was able to gather all of the L's issues, all of the HCOBs and stuff. And a lot of it's not online. Some of it is, but a lot of it's missing. And he find out what the techniques were that were originally done in the 70s when LRH was CSing things. And it was really kind of different and actually simpler than the way it was being run in the 90s and 2000s. Not to mention the fact that a lot of the original L's auditors were no longer there. These were all like new people. Plus, see, they compromised on the quality. Used to be you had to be class 6 and a class 8 in order to do L's training. You had to be an experienced auditor because you wouldn't want somebody auditing the L's who wasn't an experienced auditor. And um, then they said, well, we don't have we don't have anybody who could do the L's training. We need L's auditors. So we said, well, let's change the rules. If you're a class 6 and you have some experience, we'll train you on the L's. Or if you're a class 4, we'll put you right on the class 8 course and then we'll train you on the L's. It's like skipping a gradient on the bridge. Well, we're going to do, it takes too long to do all the grades. So we're going to do grade 0 and then do grade 4. Well, it's not going to fly.
It's a big skip gradient.
Yeah, big skip gradient. Yeah, and each one is built on the gradient of the prior thing. So if you skip the gradient, you just run into a confusion and you get a reverse flow. So you get people, now doing the L's, and not to knock them because they're good auditors. They'd have to be good to do it at all. And I'm sure they get better over time. But see, um, Pierre said, surprisingly enough, all the best auditing was at lower levels because the IAS never interfered with that. He says once you got up on the upper level auditing, the RTC was all over it with their fixed ideas and these are untrained people.
Not tech trained.
And they didn't have your well-being in mind when they were doing this.
For the bean counters.
They had their stats in mind. Can I reg enough this week so I can go on libs on Saturday? That's what they had in mind,
Gosh. Oh, well, thank you, Trey. That's cool. Just wow. I've got just a couple last little things here. Actually, I think I'm gonna just kind of coalesce into a question. What do you see for the future of the independent field in Scientology? What
uh,
what would you, I don't know, want to say recommend, but what do you see happening and what would be in your ideal world, what would be the best moves to make to ensure the future of Scientology?
good question. Uh, I kind of touched on the church. What would make it possible for the church to get back on track and become a good source of Scientology tech? Well, they've got all the training facilities. They've got all the buildings. They've got a lot of staff. If there was a really good leadership, they could come around and do really well. Right now, there's the independent field uh, has some has very little training opportunities. There's starting to be more. Um, People can do online training. There's a couple academies, smaller academies here in the U.S. Mostly, the only training you can really get is in Europe and maybe Israel too. These are like Ron's orgs, but they're the only ones that have built orgs. The independent guys in the U.S. haven't. Nobody's built an org. Um, so a lot of the people that split off and still maintained a loyalty to LRH and the tech. Um, they were people who always valued their independence. So I don't think there's any way that they're ever going to get re-established under the authority of a church. So I think that you're going to have the field, the independent field, which is going to do well. I mean, field auditors always did really well. In small missions always did really well because they were, like I say, run by really talented, uptone people. And so, they just thrived. They did really well. Um, and LRH always says about the field that you don't want to worry about the field too much because if their tech is in, they'll thrive. If it's out, they won't last long. So I don't get upset about other people on it. Even if they say, well, they're not doing it right or they could do it better. And I never get into that kind of a discussion because if they're doing it at all, I appreciate it. Because there's not a lot of people even doing it at all. I know that people keep doing it, they get better at it. It's trial and error and they, self-improve or self-correct. Um, so I think that both things are going to go forward, the independent field and the orgs, and hopefully eventually they can get along with each other and sort of, you could be a Scientologist, not be licensed by the church, or you could be an independent auditor, be licensed by the church. It's sort of a matter of choice. You could have a lot of freedom of choice in terms of how you want to pursue your bridge or how you want to pursue a career in the tech. And people have tried to a couple of people have tried to organize an org around the independent field, and this really never went anywhere for that very reason. And you know, people just didn't want to be under the thumb of some kind of organization. If you notice when people complain bitterly about Scientology, they're really complaining bitterly about the aberrations of groups.
I have to agree.
Yeah. I
Correct.
mean, occasionally somebody will trash the tech, but that's usually only because they had a really bad experience with the group.
Yeah.
So, uh, if somebody can put together a sane group, you don't have any problem recruiting staff because everybody likes to be part of a sane group. Um, but if it's not sane, you have a hell of a time trying to get staff to join or even keep them once they're there. They go, "Oh, I didn't sign up for this." Anyway, so I think that the tech itself it won't be fully appreciated for another 50 years, maybe 100 years, who knows? But there's so much of the basic tech that has worked its way into society, and people don't even realize it originally came from Dianetics and Scientology.
Right.
It's being called something else, or it's gotten incorporated into psychological tech or other things like that. Eh, I mean, none of that stuff bothers me. I've audited, I think I've ended up auditing like 6 or 7 psychologists and actually a couple of psychiatrists have shown some interest in auditing. And I gave them some sessions and they seemed like good people. They audited just like anybody else. Um, the LGBT community, there's no difference in that case. I audit I don't even have a consideration about it. It's the same auditing that you do on anybody. So, uh, so that kind of thing, you can be a little more flexible about it in the field, because you're not really trying to protect the, well, you always have a pattern of organization, whether you're an individual or a big group, but the group will immediately get rid of any disruptive um, uh, source because they can't isolate it from the rest of the org. As an individual practitioner, somebody can give you a hard time over the internet, or they can give you a hard time over the phone or something like that, but you can compartmentalize that. It doesn't have to affect anything else, really, and usually it's easily handled. And it doesn't really happen very much, um, hardly at all. The other thing people ask me is, oh, doesn't the church come down heavy on you? Well, no, not at all. I've spent maybe a half an hour in the last 17 years handling some sort of a effort of the church to, create some black PR website or something, some stupid stuff. And I'm right under their, under their shadow. The sun's so the sun's a setting away. I'm right in the shadow of the org, so I'm right here. But they don't. I think they sanely adopted a new policy. If you're not attacking us, we're not going to attack you, which is LRH policy. Where they say, "Oh, we'll go back to that because it was so horrendous when they started attacking the independent field." Because the independent field controlled the whole PR narrative. The church wasn't able at all to create any kind of PR narrative. Nobody bought, nobody believed it. And the field PR narrative was very believable because these were people that were intimately involved in these situations and gave credible firsthand reports of all of the abuses and so on. Yeah. So this is why I like our group, the OTA, OT committee, OT association, because we're an association of like-minded people who support each other. Nobody is anybody's senior or junior, and because we all are, and the only thing we ask of people is you're pro LRH, you're pro tech. So we don't allow other techs or negativity about the tech or about LRH. We don't allow any posts about that on our Facebook group. You, Mary and Z do a fantastic job as admins. It's just so appreciated. Yeah. And so it's all very theta. And one of the things that I get a lot from the people that come onto my lines is the one thing they miss having a third dynamic. They liked going to the org when they weren't being harassed, or even before they were being harassed, back in the old days. It was a fun place to go. It was like you had a lot of people you could talk tech with, or talk wins, or talk a lot of things that people just had in common. You could have a real good friendships. Um, and we still have that to some degree in people that come over here, because very often I'm in session. There's two or three, 4 or 5 people sitting in my living room. Some are here doing a round robin, like they're here all day. There are people that come and go, but they stay after session and they chat with people, and get to know each other, and some good friendships and good relationships have derived out of just people sitting in my living room talking to each other. So I feel like we have a third dynamic there. And the OTA, it's really great. So that's how I see the future of the independent field and the church. Because if the rules or the understanding of the church and the independent field is we're all pro LRH, we're all pro tech, we all want people to win and do well with the tech, winning with the tech. I mean, again, you're winning with the tech, or you're not doing it, or you're losing. If you're losing with it, it's out tech. If you, no, it's true. I was I always see, somebody who's been on the bridge and they bog down. I said, well, they're not winning with the tech anymore. They're not applying it. They're not participating in it. So my goal is to get them winning with the tech. Say it's very simple. Let's do a PTS handle. Let's do some rudiments. Oh, I have some wins. Now life looks a little better to them.
Yeah.
Why don't you go back to starting reading the book? Stay connected with source. Listen to a tape. Doesn't cost anything. Read a book. Just read a chapter on New Slant on Life or Way to Happiness. The Way to Happiness is very profound. And, I always promote it to people because if you have all these points in, you're a happy camper. If several of the points are out, generally that's why you're not a happy camper. So,
Yeah.
it's then none of that costs you a dime.
Right. Well, Trey, thank you for sitting with me today, and in the future, thanks for sitting with all of us and talking to us about these important points about Scientology in your life and your involvement with Scientology. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, and thank you for making this happen. And again, I just have a lot of affinity and caring for um, anybody that's out there who likes the tech, wants to pursue their bridge, uh, wants to pursue their training. I can help them get onto the right training lines. I can help them, either whether I audit them or somebody else audits them is okay for me. There's a lot of good auditors out there that are doing auditing, and I just hope people sort of think, well, I can. There's a way that I can pursue my bridge. It's a long-term project. There's a way that I can do it that doesn't make my life worse, doesn't create a problem for me. It solves a problem for me.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's the definition of a good solution. One that solves a problem and doesn't create new problems.
Right. Right.
So I just wanted to thank everybody for listening, and I wanted to let anybody who wants to get in calm, give me a call or email me or connect with the OTA group on Facebook. We're happy to have you as a member and participate in our theta activities.
Yes. Yes. It's a living room where you can be safe and talk tech and talk with old friends and meet new friends and solve problems.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again, everybody, for being here. And we'll talk to you again later. Thanks,
Bye.
Trey.
Bye bye.
Bye.